Good morning, all of you. Welcome back to today's video analysis session for 24th of June 2023. So let's start with all the important articles for today. So firstly, we see when India grows, the world grows, says the Indian Prime Minister as he's on a US visit. So addressing a joint session of the US Congress, Prime Minister, he stressed on the shared value of democracy. He also touched on the global concerns like the war in Ukraine and the Indo-Pacific situation. So we know, no doubt, that Indo-Pacific region in itself is very important. So we need to know about all the bodies which are, having the Indo-Pacific concern, and their main focus is to ensure that the law and order is maintained, there is regional security in that region, and then even from perspective of geography, where the important islands located. So all these are important topics. So as we are seeing this advertisement, India says no to drugs. So true friends, they will never ask you to take the drugs, and you need to connect with life and not with drugs. So here, what are the legislations that we have in the context of ensuring that the drugs, they are not circulated, they are not taken up by the people? Coming to the editorial page here, the first editorial is talking about a just civil code. So this is in the context of a uniform civil code, which is mentioned in Article 44 of the DPSP. So strike a fine balance and have a just civil code. So this topic is in news, and the uniform civil code is neither necessary, it is not desirable. When we say that after a hiatus of just 5 years, the Law Commission had concluded that it is neither necessary and not desirable. So the move now is one that keeps the pot boiling on one of the India's most ideologically as well as politically rivaled issue. So here you can see Article 44 is also mentioned. So autonomy versus the authorities. The question of personal laws is basically the question of personal and religious autonomy versus the state's authority to reform the familial relations. So since each religious group, they have their own cultural autonomy, it is thus being argued that community should itself come forward to seek the reforms. So this is the justification of the adoption of the internal law reform or the voluntary UCC. And in fact, the Special Marriage Act of 1954 and the Indian Succession Act of 1925, they are nothing but the examples of voluntary adoption of the UCC, though the recently enacted love jihad laws by prohibiting the interfaith marriages basically violate the spirit of the Special Marriage Act. So you need to find out about the basic provisions of the Special Marriage Act. And since here we are saying that recently enacted love jihad laws, they are prohibiting the spirit of the provisions of the Special Marriage Act. So why? And that you will be, like having the clarity once you go through the important provisions or the basic purpose of the Special Marriage Act. Then there are obviously regional differences as well. Like Kerala, it has abolished the Hindu joint family in 1975. Muslim marriage and divorces, they are to be registered in Bengal, Bihar, Odisha, Jharkhand under the 1876 law. Then in case of Assam, under the 1935 law, and adoption was permissible to Kashmiri Muslims. So there are regional variations also. So how are we going to deal with them is also an important question. And at present, not just Muslims, but even Hindus, Jains, Buddhists, Sikhs, Parsis, and Jews, they are governed by their own personal laws. So it is important that everybody, people from different faiths, they are on the same page. So that's there. So the Law Commission of India, it should aim to eliminate only those practices that do not meet the benchmarks set by the Constitution of India. So recently we discussed about the recommendations, the Law Commission regarding the Uniform Civil Code. So unity more than uniformity is important. So that said, the Commission must bear in its recommendation that for a diverse and multicultural polity like India, proposed UCC, it must be emblematic of India's mosaic model of multiculturalism. So logic is invariably obvious that homogenizing lithification of identities must not become a mirage for flourishing diversity. So it need not impact upon the diversity, or as we say, unity in diversity. Think so unity is far more important than uniformity. So uniformity would be there with the implementation of Uniform Civil Code. So here, unity versus uniformity, in that context, we're talking about it here. And I hope the point is clear. So under the Indian Constitution, the right to cultural autonomy defends the Indian model of multiculturalism. So prominent scholars on multiculturalism, they suggest that the Indian Constitution offers two major approaches with respect to accommodation of differences. So, one is the integrationist and another is the restricted multicultural. So, while the affirmative action policies, they largely land in the first approach, and the state assistance to minority cultures has been seen as an illegitimate concession, and it is often termed as appeasement of minorities. Then another point or another dimension is that since we're discussing about this, so India strives with preserving its multicultural diversity. It is often found at the crossroads with the values like secularism. So despite secularism being a fundamental tenet which is governing the Indian polity, India decided not to adopt the French model of Lecite, which strictly prohibits bearing any religious outfit or marker in public, that considers religion in public as a threat to the nation's secular fabric. So, thus pushing it within only the four walls of domestic household. So, Indian society, therefore, it accommodates and not just tolerates the wide array of group and the ethnic differences that exist in our society. So, it is more of accommodative in nature and not just, in the form of you're not just tolerating the differences that exist. So what are going to be the hurdles or the challenges going ahead? So simultaneously, we must understand that when a community feels threatened in any way, whether rightly or wrongly so, the collective esteem of its members, it becomes woven to the community, and community allegiance becomes much more stronger in such situations. So therefore, one hopes that the Law Commission of India, it would not contribute to the rise of reactive culturalism amongst different communities in India. So different communities, they need not feel threatened with the idea of UCC. So Muslim community too must understand that MPL and Islam, they are not one and the same. And MPL is a jurist given law and it is not entirely divine. So as the commission, it proposes an overhauling secularization of various socio-religious cultural practices that have been the mainstay of thousands of religious and ethnic communities. Since times immemorial, the path ahead is not going to be free from hurdles. Obviously, this is not going to be an easy exercise. And in the words of political philosopher Iris Young, as the value of social difference is more relational and is itself a product of social processes, we believe that it will be incumbent upon the Commission to strike a fine balance, as it should aim to eliminate only those practices that do not meet the benchmarks set by the Constitution. So since Indian Prime Minister, he's on a US visit, so the Modi visit further strengthened the ties between India and US, no doubt. So which all areas they were taken up, that is much more important for us from the perspective of international relations. So, rolling out the red carpet for the Prime Minister Narendra Modi during his state visit to Washington, US, President Joseph Biden, he underlined his belief that India-US partnership will be one of the defining relationships of the 21st century, one that has had a strong belief in as the US Vice President Barack in the Obama administration. So the phrase mirrored the one used by the US President Barack Obama as the state banquet for former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in 2009, where he said that defining partnerships of the 21st century. So again, it was a reiteration. So the two sides, they've announced new deals involving high-end defense cooperation. That is one of the major focus areas. And then semiconductor industry investments is another important area. Then a partnership in the quantum and advanced computing and artificial intelligence. So the emerging and the critical technologies is also another facet of our cooperation. And the deal for the co-production of the jet engines in India. So even that is an unprecedented level of technology transfer that is going to happen. Then India's decision to join the 11-nation mineral security partnership for the critical minerals, where China, it has the global monopoly right now, and cooperation on the critical and emerging technologies, particularly in the clean energy sector, it will strengthen the future cooperation. And finally, India's move to sign on to the 27-nation Artemis Accords for cooperation in space exploration and the NASA-ISRO partnerships for the human spaceflight will also catapult India's ambitions in this sphere. So these are some of the latest developments. So squaring the circle at the India-Egypt summit, again, an important topic from International Relations GS2. So here talking about the India-Egypt summit. So obviously the relationship between both the countries becomes an important topic. So there is a danger that after an adrenaline-rushed and consequential parley in the United States, Prime Minister Modi's visit to Egypt may appear to be a bit underwhelming, and it is anything but. So historically, India-Egypt ties, they are perhaps the oldest civilizational link. So here talking about the historical context. So in 2750 BCE, the Pharaoh Sahur Pharaoh Sarosh sent ships to the land of Punt, which historians they identify with the peninsular India. So land of Punt is identified as peninsular India. And by the middle of the second millennium BC, Egyptians, mummies, they were wrapped in muslin dyed with indigo. Both of them, both the things were from India. So talking about the India-Egypt links and some data about our relationship, about the trade that we have. So it is this historic inspiration that needs to be invoked while aiming for a greater bilateral relevance and substantiality. So when we talk about from decolonization to non-alignment and from Egyptians' Bollywood frenzy to the addition of lilting the Egyptian music in Indian scores, they have delivered a little of substance, but India's trade with the most populous Arab country, it stood at $6,000 million in 2022-23, and that has declined by 17%. Then apart from this, India, it was Egypt's 6th largest trading partner, and Egypt was India's 38th largest trading partner. Then talking about the investments. So Indian investments in Egypt, they were spread over 50 projects, totaling around $3.15 billion. And apart from that, Egypt, it has also invested $37 million in India. And then talking about the Indian diaspora living in Egypt, so there are less than 5,000 Indians in Egypt, and nearly a fifth of them being the students. So underperformance of bilateral ties is not due to lack of bilateral institutional mechanisms. So that is not a problem, but their efficacy and sense of purpose is the main challenge for us. So India, definitely we have a joint commission, foreign office consultations, and at least 9 joint working groups. And then India's defense and external affairs ministers, they visited Egypt during the past year as well. They held a bilateral summit less than 5 months ago when the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi he visited India. He was a chief guest at the Republic Day. So, what are the opportunities and challenges between India and Egypt? So, if the forthcoming Cairo summit, it is not to become yet another event, which is event management exercise. So, it would need to leverage the opportunities while avoiding the pitfalls. So, Egypt, it is a large country and definitely economy as well. So, it is politically stable and its socio-economic conditions, even they are also quite similar to India. So, Egypt's largest imports, they are refined petroleum, wheat, cars, corn, and pharmaceuticals, all of which India has the potential to supply. So, this is one potential area or one opportunity where we can cooperate. Another, the Egyptian government, it has an ambitious infrastructure development agenda as well. So, even here, uh, definitely we can say opportunities are present for India. But these opportunities, they're offset by serious challenges. So what are the challenges? So firstly, the Egyptian economy, it is in serious crisis. So the huge financial commitments, they have coincided with the static economy, pandemic, global slowdown, and Ukraine conflict. So from the perspective of the Egyptian economy, there are certain challenges that needs to be dealt with, and obviously accordingly, decisions regarding investments need to be taken up. Then talking about tourism, even that has dropped, and imports like cereals that have become costly. So annual inflation is above 30%, and currency has lost more than half of its value since Feb 2022. So foreign exchange scarcity is another challenge. So the affluent Gulf Arab states, they initially supported the Egyptian economy with nearly $30 billion, but they have been lately reluctant, citing various governance issues in Egypt. So their foreign debt is at 43% of their GDP, and its net foreign assets, they are minus $24 billion. So the acute forex situation compelled the government to issue in January this year in order for the postponement of the projects with a large foreign currency component and cuts to non-essential spending. So basically, the economy is not in a good state. So that is going to be the major challenge in strengthening the bilateral relations between India and Egypt. So this article, it can be a case study in terms of if there is a heat wave like condition, and obviously there is increase in the number of patients in the hospital. So how are you going to actually deal with this situation, being the DM? So you can think about the steps which you can take, and you can like ensure the preparedness level, and then how are you going to tackle the situation in the hospitals. So again, these topics are a repeat. We took them up yesterday as well. So they are completely a repeated topic. So India, US expanding scope of cooperation in the strategic areas. And the Prime Minister also lauds Kamala Harris for her contribution towards strengthening the ties. So that's there. When we talk about Quad, I2U2, there's already been a question on I2U2. So these are the important areas. So G20 trade unions meet emphasizes global social security. So there's a need for forward-looking policies. So here we have the Labor 20 session was being addressed. So two statements adopted by the unions on universalization of the social security and the portability of the social security funds, and on empowering the women in the future of work and upskilling the women workforce in tech-intensive environments were a testament to the spirit of the social dialogue. So all the keywords have been used here. You can note them down. And obviously, gender parity is one of the important areas. Coming to the world page. So United Nations says that violence in the occupied West Bank could spiral out of control. So situation is basically very intense and violent between Israel and Palestine, and specifically in the area of West Bank. So I've repeated this a number of times, the important geographical areas around these two countries. So NATO winds up its largest air exercise in Europe. So the name is Air Defender 23. It maneuvers basically brought together some 250 military aircraft from 25 NATO and partner nations like Japan and Sweden. So that's there. And then affirming US as a trusted long-term partner for technology, India sends message to China. So Modi and Biden launched two joint task force on advanced telecommunications focused on Open RAN and R&D in 5G and 6G technology. And then an MOU was also signed on semiconductor supply chain. So UK accuses Russia of training combat dolphins in Crimea. So dolphins, they are being trained at the Sevastopol State Oceanarium in Crimea. Here is a picture from there. So British military spies on Friday, they said that Russia appears to be training combat dolphins in the annexed Crimean Peninsula to counter the Ukrainian forces. And in the latest update on the conflict, UK Defense Intelligence said that Russian Navy had invested heavily in security at the Black Sea Fleet's main base at Sevastopol since last year. So this includes at least 4 layers of nets and booms across the harbor entrance. And there is an increased number of trained marine mammals. So imagery shows a near doubling of the floating mammal pens in the harbor, which highly likely contain the bottle-nosed dolphin. So animals were likely intended to counter the enemy divers, and Russian Navy has used beluga whales and seals for a range of missions in the Arctic waters. So here, obviously, you need to know about the important international conventions and treaties for prevention of cruelty to animals and the commercial trade. So all of that, like we have CITES convention. So likewise, you need to know about all of the relevant topics which are concerned with this topic. Coming to the business page, price stability is a must for growth. So as we say that there is always a trade-off between inflation and growth for the RBI whenever there's like a decision has to be taken about the changes in the repo rate. So there's like both the things, they operate in the opposite directions. But when we talk about sustainable growth, so definitely price stability is one of the most important components. So bringing down inflation and stabilizing the inflation expectations, that will revive the consumer spending. So even, stabilizing inflation expectations, that even in future, what are your expectations about the inflation? They needs to be that they need to be stabilized so that we are able to ensure that consumer spending starts rising. So that is also important to boost the corporate revenues and profits, thus giving an incentive for the private capital expenditure. So once the situation became much more stable and under control and moderate, and obviously then we'll see an increase in even the private investments. So this is coming from the Deputy Governor of RBI, Patra. This is what he writes in the monthly bulletin. So path to the high but sustainable inclusive growth has to be paved by price stability. So you can like note down all these keywords: sustainable and inclusive growth. Right, and then stabilizing the inflation expectations is also one of the things. Otherwise, other things they are common, like obviously that is written by everyone, but you need to focus upon the distinct terms that are being used, which are often missed or which might not be written by other aspirants in their answers. So you need to focus upon writing more distinct answers. Then most of the states, they failed to meet their capital spending targets in the previous financial year. So large states like UP, Maharashtra, they faltered significantly in their capital spending plans for 2022-23, while just 6 states, they managed to come close to meeting their capex targets. The decision by US, India to end the trade row is a big victory. So this was one of the issues. So the decision taken by the US and India to end the 6 major trade disputes at WTO is a big victory, and it will mutually beneficial for both the countries. So disputes, it includes 3 initiated by India and as many by the US. So he said the resumption of the talks at the Trade Policy Forum has started yielding significant results. So bilateral trade, goods trade, it rose to $128.8 billion earlier from $119.5 billion. Taking up the Financial Express newspaper and the important topics from here. So this we have just seen right now. We have decided to end the 6 WTO disputes. So what is like the proper process of dispute settlement at WTO? The important agreements of WTO, all the important ones, all the agreements that are important. So we need to know about all of the agreements, and around 70% of India's steel exports and 80% of the aluminum exports to the US, they will be exempted from the additional duties imposed by that country since 2018. So even that is a welcome step. So India, US will demonstrate democracies deliver. So rousing welcome for Modi as he addresses the US Congress. You can see picture from the event. So without naming China, Prime Minister flags dark clouds of coercion. So it's basically hinting towards China. So the visit, it has resulted in a great positive transformation, and the two countries, despite emerging from different circumstances and history, they will together demonstrate that democracy is better and democracies deliver. And then talking about Indo-Pacific, so stability of the region, it has become one of the central concerns of the India-US partnership. So insolvency and data protection bills on the monsoon session agenda. So parliament session is likely between July 17 and August 11. So that is going to be the monsoon session. So you need to know about what the constitution talks about the frequency of the parliamentary sessions or not, like the political angle about this. So Parliament's monsoon session, it will like take up the key economic bills on proposed National Financial Information Registry, data protection, and insolvency, among others. So this is one. So this is going to be basically, it is going to create one registry to provide 360-degree information system on borrowers to quicken the process of credit and cut the cost of credit. Then digital personal data protection bill, it is be like focusing upon processing the digital personal data in a way that recognizes both the rights of individuals and the need to process personal data for the lawful purposes. And then talking about IBC amendment, so that is to extend the pre-packaged insolvency scheme to certain larger firms and expedite the resolution process. So according to RBI paper, inflation is affecting consumption and investment. We just saw it on the business page on the Hindu newspaper. So the deputy governor of RBI, he makes a pitch for stabilizing inflation expectations. That is important for reviving the consumer spending and also for furthering the private capex. So UPI account for 90% of the retail transactions in past 5 years. So total of 9.4 billion UPI transactions, they were recorded in the month of May, with 143% year-on-year increase in the successful transactions under the UPI auto pay feature. So talking about the forex reserves, so our forex reserves, they have increased by 70.2 billion since October 2022 to $593 billion, which is sufficient to cover 10 months of imports. And we can say, or 97% the total external debt outstanding at the end of December 2022. So we are in a safe position. So India's forex reserves, they have increased cumulatively by $31, which is the second highest among the major forex reserves holding countries. Taking up Indian Express newspapers, so again, India, America. So another AI, not artificial intelligence, but America and India. Without naming China, Prime Minister flags the dark clouds of coercion, no ifs or buts on terror from Pakistan. And that's their technology is the new driver for diplomacy. So we've all taken up all these dimensions. Not going to take them up in detail. So you can see Indian colors, India colors, landmarks in New York, they were lit up Thursday to mark the visit of Prime Minister Modi to US. So here you can see the Niagara Falls and the colors of Indian flag from the waterfall you can see. Then Indian consulate here also and Empire State Building. You can see the top, again an Indian flag. So from 2005 to 2023, how the needle moved in strategic ties between India and US. So here we see cut to July 2005 when the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh he addressed the US Congress to get an idea of how the needle has moved over the years in strategic ties between the two countries. So in that address, there was no mention of the defense ties at all, but he laid the foundation of high technology transfer by famously announcing the field of civil nuclear energy is a vital area for cooperation between the two countries. So as a consequence of the collective efforts, our relationship in the sector is being transformed. So back then, we focused more upon civil nuclear energy in the agreement. Then In June 2016, the Prime Minister Modi, he first addressed the US Congress. Defense Connect was mentioned as a job creator, a trade, and there was talk of expanding security cooperation. And then in that address, Prime Minister said that the flow of goods and services and capital between us generates jobs in both our societies. And in trade also, so in defense, India exercises with the United States more than we do with any other partner. So today our relationship, it has overcome the hesitations of history. And he said that 16 years after the Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, in his address to the US Congress in 2000, issued a call to step out of the shadow of hesitation in the past. So it took another 7 years for the needle to move and for Prime Minister to talk about defense ties with the US publicly without a political cost at home. So while the defense deals in the form of technology transfer in the GE jet engine deal and the drone deal, India plans to procure the General Atomics MQ-9B HALE UAVs, which is one of the key takeaways. And other major takeaway is the high intensity cooperation in critical and emerging technologies. So that's how the needle is moved over our strategic ties. This we have seen that India joins the US-led critical mineral club. So you need to find out more about this. This is definitely the most important areas. So here everything has been summarized from technology, defense, people-centric efforts, sustainable development, health, Indo-Pacific, fighting terror and drugs. So this is one of the most important topics. So here, whatever agreements or bodies are mentioned, you need to find out more about them. Again, this article is about Modi and Biden. Defensive no more. So the Prime Minister Modi's visit to US was about acknowledging larger imperatives that bind and overcoming the hurdles in their ties. So this we have seen that we have agreed to resolve the 6 trade disputes at WTO. So in a new space, again, we are cooperating the space sector as well, Artemis mission. So here it is the Prime Minister's speech mentioned about mission life, which is lifestyle for the environment. So this was a thing that was initiated by India. You mentioned about women sages composed many verses in the Vedas, and today women, they are leading us to a better future. So India's vision is not just for development which benefits women, it is a woman-led development. Again, a very, very important topic. So a woman, it has risen from a humble tribal background to be our head of the state. So he's talking about the president of India. Nearly 1.5 million elected women lead us at various levels. So today, women, they serve our country in the army, navy, air force, and India also has the highest percentage of women airline pilots in the world. So he said that I believe that investing in a girl child lifts up the entire family, empowering women transforms the nation as well. Then he talked about India is known for its traditions. The younger generation is also making it a hub of technology. In India, technology is not only about innovation, but also about inclusion. So today, the digital platforms, they're empowering the rights and dignity of the people while protecting privacy. So these are some of the important things. Rest, you can just go through this article on your own. So Russia says that wait for the real, sorry, Ukraine says that wait for the real counteroffensive, says Ukraine as it pushes back. So ensure safety of the nuclear plant. Russia urges the International Atomic Energy Agency. So you need to first find out about this agency and then the important areas or the important nuclear plants which are there in Ukraine. One is Zaporizhia, which was even asked in the examination this time. The Japan's Shikoku pilgrimage, so 88 Buddhist temples and 750 miles untold gifts. So, a famed route on the smallest of Japan's four main islands offers breathtaking views and an array of lessons. So, Shikoku pilgrimage, you need to know it is associated with Japan. So, the pilgrimage on Shikoku, which is the smallest of Japan's four main islands, is a 750-mile route that links 88 Buddhist temples, each of which claims a connection to Kukai, which is a celebrated monk who, after returning from a trip to China in the 9th century, founded one of the major schools of Buddhism in Japan. So again, one of the important topic from strategy and foreign policy regarding India-US embrace. So democracy and autocracy, US force multiplied, China on India's mind, and both sides a win-win. You can just go through it once. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us in today's analysis session, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and also hit the like button for this video. Thank you so much for joining us for today.